Hi, I'm Carrie Lee Merritt, here again with Sarah Tabor, Dr. Sarah Tabor, and we've been having many good, fruitful discussions about the state of agriculture and labor, especially in the U.S. South. For this particular episode, though, we wanted to get a little more personal, go a little deeper into our own pasts, and share what drove us to study what we study, what drove us to do what we do now. And we have talked a little bit about class, but both of us have issues of class in our background, coming from, whether it's working class grandparents or even poor white grandparents. What has class meant to you?
Yeah, and I think that's an awesome question. Is what are a couple of white ladies doing talking about race, class, and gender and labor? So yeah, I grew up somewhat working class. My parents definitely grew up working class, and they were both pretty upwardly mobile. My dad did the military. My mom became a nurse, and they worked very hard to kind of get us out of that working class cycle of poverty. Their parents had already done their kind of work, and so that was a multi-generational thing. So it was really interesting to have kind of a middle class lifestyle, but also still very working class attitudes and approaches to things. There was no such thing as a job you're too good for. Yeah, my parents made sure that, I actually worked in agriculture, got a farm job. You only have to be 14 to work on a farm versus like 16 or 18 in various other jobs. So that was my first job. And did some time in a factory. Got replaced by a machine. That was pretty cool. And, so you're doing some time in real life and in the trenches. And I think you just probably see some things that people who did the unpaid internship route, maybe not have seen. And that it kind of exposes you to some things in life that really kind of underpin our society in a way that a lot of people who haven't been there can miss.
Mhm.
And in addition to like the good things that you learn, and this wasn't because of the working class thing, like class doesn't cause violence, but there's also a lot of domestic violence in that upbringing. And I kind of really ran into church to get away from that. It was a safe, quiet place out of the chaos of home. So that was a refuge for a while, and I really kind of drank deeply from the life of conservative religion and everything. But then as you get older, you start to realize that my family was not the only family where the man got away with domestic violence repeatedly for years, even though people kind of knew what was going on. And I started to realize that the people who were getting away with it were getting away with it in large part because they were white. They kind of really fit the image of responsible breadwinner and all of that stuff. And so if you complained, you would not be believed. People were really primed to see domestic violence as a black and brown problem. And so it's really interesting to me when people say things like, oh, we need white supremacy to protect white women and children. And you're like, that's not how this works. If you're interested in stopping domestic violence, if you're a woman, and all of us, if you're white, you've been a white child at some point, right? And this white supremacy thing does not work out well. It really promotes the domestic violence and it promotes people getting away with it. And then moving on later on as a grown up, when you start working in agriculture, you start to see some of those same patterns. The same kind of conservative attitudes are very entrenched in agriculture. And it doesn't do good things for anybody. It doesn't help the farm workers. It doesn't even help the family farmers who have a lot of those attitudes, or the family farmers who have managed to escape those attitudes and are now shunned by their community for being too progressive. It just wasn't helping anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk in the sustainable agriculture field about how things that are holding us back, we'll say things like agribusiness. We will not talk about our own white supremacy. And we won't talk about, we'll talk about gender issues to some extent, but they're really not getting front and center the way they need to be. They're really treated almost like details. And to me, after 20 years in ag, and after growing up in that environment, I'm like, this is front and center. This is not a side detail of the problem. This is the problem.
Absolutely. As Sarah and I have talked about, we actually come from very similar backgrounds in certain ways, although my parents are actually, probably the American dream, started off with nothing, but have done quite well and have gotten educations. That's not the case for a family a generation back. One of my own grandmothers was just barely literate, only went to school probably through 6th or 7th grade before she had to drop out completely to work in cotton mills and picking cotton. So poverty and kind of the culture of poverty and many of the thought processes, I think that hold people back once you're trapped in that kind of thought cycle of poverty, the ways that poor people think that they're not able to achieve, that they're not able to compete at certain levels. I still think that held me back personally in a lot of ways, and I still will probably always carry a chip on my shoulder in some ways because of the ways in which class and coming from poor people and working class people, even generations back, I think still affected my life. And yet another thing that we both had in common was we were both told we got to work as soon as we were of legal age. Going to work, it didn't matter where. You know, I've waited tables, I've taken care of children, nannied, I have worked in all sorts of retail jobs. I've worked for CPAs, for lawyers, everything I could possibly do to make a buck. And one of the earliest jobs I had was in retail. And as a 16-year-old girl, let me tell you, that teaches you a lot about life, especially once you get into the restaurant industry. One thing that shocked me, being a white woman in this day and age, was kind of the Me Too movement of how many white women it seemed like they were completely unaware of everything that kind of goes on at these lower level wage paying jobs, these lower level, you know, whether it's service jobs, service industry, food industry, retail, the kind of daily sexual harassment that goes on for women who work in these kind of jobs where they don't have really any legal recourse to fight against their own employers in many cases. There was a kind of naivete, I think, by many white women because of class issues, right?
Yeah. People of color, like certainly we have people of color with high class, but you're a lot more likely to still have family members who are not high on the socioeconomic ladder. And so there's still a little bit more familiarity with those issues. Whereas like some white folks can just be really sheltered.
Even as I show in Masterless Men, it's always been for poor white women, if you have to go out and earn a wage for some man, you know, especially when you're working directly for him, the chances of whether sexual harassment or actual sexual assault or rape, they're very high. And up until very recently, the last couple of generations, in some ways it becomes just an expected part of your job, is that if you're going to be working for a powerful man who pays your wage, you're going to have to expect some of that and just put up with it.
Right, and it's kind of interesting because it kind of goes along with this feeling that we had a couple generations ago, and even pretty recently, that working women are floozies. You know, like obviously that's just how it works, and that's because sexual harassment and just assault in the workplace were so normalized that it was like, well, you can't work and be a good lady.
Right.
And that's something that working women across all class and race situations have kind of had to contend with, and it's just, which is why it's so crazy that it caught some people by surprise. You know.